Hey there, Cinemaster fans! Hope you're ready for some movie magic. Let's dive right in. Our movie begins in space, where a glowing object is flying and heading toward Earth. On its way, the object collides with a satellite, altering its course and entering the atmosphere. Meanwhile, a boy named Josh, living in New York City, is stargazing with his telescope. Josh notices the glowing object descending from the sky. The object, roughly the size of a tennis ball, crashes through Josh's window and lands in his fish tank. The object absorbs the water in the tank, and Josh observes what is happening. 3 months later, a massive fireball appears in space and descends to Earth, landing in New York City near the Statue of Liberty. The fire around the ball extinguishes, revealing a man in a white suit. The man moves robotically through the city, observing and enjoying the humans around him. While crossing the street, a car hits him, twisting his leg. The woman driving the car gets out to call for help, but the man disappears. He reappears in a side alley where something strange happens. His ears open like doors, and a tiny human emerges. The tiny human descends to the man's leg using ropes, opens a panel in the leg, and finds broken wires. He begins repairing them to fix the twisted leg. Another small human appears, recording data on the leg, and then moves to the man's brain. It turns out that the man is actually a robot controlled by 100 alien beings from a planet called Neil. The leader, referred to as the captain, manages the robot, while the other aliens each control a specific part of the robot's body, sending reports to the captain. One report reveals that the robot's shields were damaged during the crash, and it will only function efficiently for 48 more hours before shutting down. The tracking system is also broken. The captain convenes a leadership meeting to solve the problem. The aliens are on a mission to find an energy orb that landed on Earth 3 months ago to save their planet from a crisis caused by an energy shortage. The orb is intended to absorb Earth's oceans, as the salt in the water can be converted into energy for their planet. The captain's second-in-command is named Number 2, and the advisor is Number 3. The robot, resembling a human, is named Dave. The aliens struggle to make Dave behave like a human, so they use Google to learn human behavior. Meanwhile, the New York Police Department notices the atmospheric entry of the object and assigns an officer and his assistant to investigate. They find the crater created by the robot's crash and identify its face. Orders are issued to apprehend anyone resembling the face they found. Josh notices Dave through a window and informs his mother, Gina, who turns out to be the woman who hit the robot with her car. Gina apologizes to Dave for the accident, startling the captain as it's his first interaction with a human. He responds through a microphone, but the sound frequency is too high, breaking nearby glass. Number 2 adjusts the frequency, and the captain tells Gina everything is fine. Gina invites Dave to stay at her house. Inside Gina's house, the captain decides to name the robot Dave after searching for human names on Google. Dave introduces himself to Gina. Number 3 notices a picture of the energy orb in the house and asks Gina about it. She explains that the picture is of her son Josh at a school science fair, where he used the orb as part of his project. The team locates Josh and plans to retrieve the orb. Dave asks Gina for permission to leave and accidentally opens a closet door, thinking it's the exit. He eventually finds the correct door and heads toward Josh. On the way, Dave passes a playground, where children mistake him for an ice cream vendor due to his outfit. Dave decides to buy new clothes but has no money. He scans and replicates money, then uses it to purchase clothes. Dave arrives at Josh's school, where the principal mistakes him for a substitute teacher and sends him to a classroom. Dave teaches the students about the planet Nil, confusing them. During the class, Dave speaks privately with Josh and asks about the energy orb. Josh reveals that a bully named Rich took it and will be at a street fair the next day. Dave decides to go to the fair with Josh to retrieve the orb. Josh takes Dave home, where they play video games. Josh is amazed at Dave's skill and speed, suspecting he might be a robot. Gina arrives home and invites Dave to stay for dinner. Number 4 reminds the captain that time is running out, but the captain decides to stay for dinner. Afterward, Dave notices a painting in the house and asks Gina about it. She explains that it represents love from a past relationship. Dave, unfamiliar with the concept of love, asks Gina to explain it. She tells him that when he experiences love, he won't need to ask about it. Dave doesn't understand and leaves the house at night, choosing to sleep next to a homeless man on the street. The homeless man Dave covers himself with his blanket to keep warm from the cold, and the captain is moved by the kindness of the homeless man. He informs the aliens that humans are more advanced than they initially thought. The robot relaxes, and Dave falls asleep. Meanwhile, the doctor speaks with the captain, explaining that strange behaviors are spreading among the crew inside the robot. The captain notices Number 3 staying up late, diligently completing her work. She explains to him that she discovered humans watch a particular movie every year during Christmas. The captain and number 3 watch the film, where the protagonist tries to do the impossible to prove his love for the one he loves. Both the captain and number 3 are moved by the film and even shed tears over its events. They feel a mutual attraction but then hide their emotions and go to sleep. On the final day, Dave's energy level drops to 20%, and he becomes a target for capture after the police manage to identify him. Dave goes with Josh to an exhibition to retrieve the energy orb from Rich. At the exhibition, Dave participates in a hot dog eating contest and wins because he is a robot capable of consuming large amounts of food. He wins a teddy bear and gifts it to Gina, who is delighted by the present. Later, Dave finds Rich bullying Josh, so he lifts Rich off the ground and throws him into the air. Josh is happy that Rich got what he deserved. Dave then takes the energy orb from Rich and invites Gina and her son to a restaurant to celebrate Gina's birthday. Number 2 grows upset and insists to the captain that the orb should be used for the ocean instead of what the captain is planning. The captain argues back, saying that Gina and Josh helped them find the orb and that they owe them a debt of gratitude. Frustrated, number 2 storms out of the command room located in the robot's brain. Dave takes Gina and her son to a Latin restaurant to celebrate her birthday. Meanwhile, the police locate Dave's whereabouts and head there to capture him. Due to the aliens' extended time on Earth, they begin adopting human behaviors. Number 2 turns the control room into a dance club, dancing with the crew. Number 3 wears a Latin dress inspired by what she saw at the restaurant and asks the captain to dance with her. However, the captain is focused on Gina as he controls Dave, who is dancing with her. Number 3 gets upset and leaves the room. Suddenly, the police arrive at the restaurant and order Dave to surrender for interrogation. Gina and her son are confused about why the police want to arrest Dave. Officer Dooley interrogates Dave. Meanwhile, number 2 grows tired of the captain's behavior and lack of seriousness. So he stages a coup against the captain with some crew members. They imprison the captain, who tells the crew not to follow number 2's orders. However, time is running out, and they may miss the chance to save Planet Neal. The crew, led by number 2, proceed with the mission, with number 3 also assisting. The officers hear what's happening inside Dave's brain due to the alien's presence. Dave tells the officer interrogating him that he is an alien and asks to be left alone. Number 2 gives a speech to the crew about becoming the new captain and declares that anyone behaving like humans will be punished. He takes control of Dave, making him shoot lasers from his fingers, destroying the walls of the room, and escaping. The police fire at Dave, but he is unaffected because his body is made of metal. Number 7 disapproves of number 2's reckless actions and escapes from Dave's ear to avoid the madness. While leaving, number 2 notices Gina and decides to take revenge on her for wasting their time on Earth and delaying their mission. He controls Dave to insult Gina's artwork, breaking her heart. Number 3 becomes concerned about number 2's behavior and frees the real captain from the cell. However, number 2 captures them and decides to eject them from the robot, expelling them through Dave's nostrils. The captain and number 3 navigate the city in their small bodies, trying not to get stepped on by humans. They struggle along the way and argue about the captain's decision to dance with Gina instead of her. Eventually, they use a plastic bag to fly back to the robot and correct the situation. The bag lands on a bus windshield, and the driver wipes them off, causing them to land on Dave's shoe. The captain apologizes to number 3, explaining that he chose her for the mission because of her kind heart. He admits he wouldn't have been anything without her. She asks why he never said this before, and he explains that he learned to express his feelings from humans. He tells her he should have done the impossible for her, like in the movie they watched together. They re-enter the robot through Dave's pants. Meanwhile, Dave hails a taxi with his hand, and the taxi moves because of his super strength as he tries to conserve energy. He instructs the driver to take him near the Statue of Liberty. Josh cannot believe Dave is causing the destruction and convinces his mother to help save him. At the police station, Officer Dooley notices number 17 inside his coffee cup and interrogates Dave to learn where he's headed. Dave arrives at the Statue of Liberty and prepares to throw the orb into the ocean to absorb the saltwater for Planet Neal. However, the captain manages to hack into Dave's control system and stops him, angering number 2. Number 2 orders the crew to capture the captain and number 3, but the captain enters the control room and declares that the real captain has returned. The crew stops supporting number 2 due to his madness and follows the captain's orders instead. The captain commands them to punish number 2 by imprisoning him in Dave's rear forever. The energy orb falls to the ground and rolls into the ocean, beginning to absorb the ocean's water. The captain attempts to retrieve the orb, but receives a report that the remaining energy is critically low. The crew faces a choice: either use the energy to retrieve the orb or return to their home planet. The captain decides to save Earth and asks the crew to support his decision, which they agree to. At that moment, Dave unleashes all his energy to stop the ball and prevent it from absorbing the surroundings. He succeeds in pulling it towards him, and it stays with him. However, after that, Dave loses power, and the robot is completely out of electricity, unable to move. At that point, the police arrive, and Dooley realizes he can arrest Dave since he can't move. But Josh and his mother are present, and they take a taser from the police and use it to electrify Dave, recharging him. Dave regains his ability to move, opens his mouth, and releases the captain and number 3 to the people. At that moment, the captain bids farewell to Josh and his mother, Gina, telling them he has decided to find energy on another planet besides Earth to save his own planet. Then, Officer Dooley returns number 17 to the robot, and Dave takes off to return to space. However, as he is taking off, the U.S. Defense Forces arrive and throw a net over him to stop him from moving, causing him to crash to the ground. At that point, the crew moves from Dave's brain, which is designed like a Touareg spaceship. The shoe detaches from Dave, the engines activate, and they fly into space, leaving behind the robot Dave and number 2, who is trapped inside him. On their way, the captain proposes to number 3, and she agrees. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Hey there, Cinemaster fans! Hope you're ready for some movie magic. Let's dive right in. At the beginning of our film, we hear a voice narrating that, before the great flood that covered the Earth, many difficult events started happening. However, we are focused on a particular story, one of many stories that have turned into myths over the years. We learn that at some point, the world was ruled by creatures from other dimensions known as the Ancient Rulers. Earth experienced a very dark era under their reign. In a palace on the island of Minos, everyone in the kingdom worshipped idols, especially bulls, which they considered to be very powerful creatures. Over time, this dark empire grew, along with greed and avarice, not to mention the evil and madness that took hold of humans. Men were consumed by these devilish thoughts and sacrificed the princess to the ruling bull. As a result, a small creature was born, which made this dark empire even stronger. This creature grew hungrier as it grew older. Eventually, the beast was placed in a labyrinth to keep it under control. At a certain point, a new law was introduced in the Minos Empire after a prince in the kingdom was killed. The law decreed that every 3 years, 8 people would be taken from their homes and placed in the labyrinth to be sacrificed to the beast. When the time for the 50th sacrifice approached, we meet a man named Theo, who is raising a flock of sheep with his friend Dano. While walking, they spot someone in a cloak from afar. Dano mentions that his father told him this man is an omen of misfortune, and that whenever someone sees him, something bad happens afterward. When Theo returns to the tent, he tells his father about what he saw in the forest with Dano, and he also expresses how much he misses the girl he loved, who was taken to be sacrificed to the beast. He asks his father how many more people will be killed to appease the beast and avenge the long-dead prince. His father tries to console him, but Theo is deeply frustrated. Meanwhile, Dano speaks to his love, Morna, and confesses his fear of losing her when the soldiers arrive. At this moment, some men from the village, including Theo's father, gather. We learn that Theo's father is the leader of the area. They discuss sending someone to kill the beast or sacrificing themselves to protect their children from being taken. They believe that if they succeed, people will no longer live in fear. One man suggests offering Theo as one of the 8 youths to be sacrificed, but the leader refuses, saying he cannot do that because Theo is his son and will inherit leadership after him. One day, Theo sees wolves approaching his sheep from afar. He runs to save them, but unfortunately, he is too late. By the time he arrives, one of the sheep has been killed. He notices one wolf still there, but it runs away, and Theo chases after it. While running, Theo discovers a tree with a strange symbol carved into it. Looking around, he finds the entrance to a cave where the mysterious cloaked figure he previously saw resides. Theo enters the cave and discovers that the cloaked figure is actually an old woman, with the wolf sitting beside her. Theo talks to her about the symbol on the tree, telling her that he recognizes it because he has the other half of it. He shows her a broken pendant he wears around his neck, explaining that the other half of the pendant is with the girl he loves, who was taken to be sacrificed to the beast. The old woman tells him that the girl was indeed taken but not sacrificed. She reveals that the girl is in the labyrinth beneath the palace. Theo doesn't believe the old woman, but she insists that to save his love, he must kill the beast known as the Minotaur. That night, Theo thinks about his love, who was taken from him. The next morning, Theo's father wakes him up and tells him to take the sheep and leave, as the soldiers are coming soon. Theo tells his father about his conversation with the old woman in the cave, and how she said his love is still alive. He adds that if he wants to see her again, he must kill the Minotaur. His father gets angry and dismisses the old woman's words as nonsense, saying that no one has been able to kill the Minotaur to this day. That day, they see the Empire ships approaching from afar. At night, the soldiers arrive at the village and take the youths. Theo is sitting in the mountains as his father instructed, but he can't stop thinking about the old woman's words. Meanwhile, the soldiers raid the tents and take the youths they find. Theo, still lost in thought, remembers his love who was taken from him. Suddenly, he gets up and runs back to the village. As the soldiers march away with the 8 chosen youths, Theo distracts one of the soldiers and secretly takes the place of one of the girls without anyone noticing. Theo's father sees the youths being taken and is heartbroken, unaware that his son is among them. In the next scene, we see the youths locked in a large iron cage. Dano notices someone covered in a blanket and checks on them, only to discover it's his friend Theo. Later, Theo speaks with one of the youths, Tyro, with whom he has no prior camaraderie. Theo tells Tyro that he plans to kill the beast, but Tyro doesn't believe anyone can kill it, even though they both wish for the same thing. Each youth has their own beliefs about the beast, and one of them even feels proud of their role in the sacrifice. When they reach the Dark Empire, they are brought before Emperor Deucalion, who orders the soldiers to begin the sacrifice immediately, starting with 2 girls. In front of his throne is a pit covered with thick iron bars, where the youths are to be thrown. Before throwing the girls, Theo tells Deucalion that the beast won't like them, but Deucalion orders him to be silent. He then calls the kingdom's princess, takes an animal skull, and makes her inhale the smoke emanating from it. The princess approaches the 2 girls and drugs them, making it easy to throw them to the beast. The iron bars open, and Deucalion provokes the beast, which initially does not appear. Eventually, the beast emerges, its horned shadow visible, and its roar shakes the entire place. At this moment, Theo and Tyro decide to seize the opportunity and attack the soldiers, but unfortunately they fail, and the soldiers defeat them. Quickly, the princess orders the soldiers to take the 2 girls away from the pit, while Deucalion orders his men to prepare the pit because they will throw the 8 young men in at once. After that, he yells at the princess for speaking. In the following scene, we see the young men being held in a place until the soldiers come to take them and sacrifice them. Then we see the princess speaking in a very low voice to one of her servants, asking her to bring Theo, as the old witch had warned her that he would come. When Princess Raffaella locks herself in her room, Theo attacks her. At that moment, Raffaella tells him she wants his help to escape from this place. However, Deucalion overhears and sees everything. Raffaella then tells him about the girl who came last time and is still alive, revealing that she is Theo's beloved. Raffaella tells him to save her, and in return, she will help him. At that moment, Deucalion arrives with his men and orders them to imprison Theo. Theo tries to defend himself but is eventually caught. Afterward, Deucalion threatens Raffaella and orders his men to throw Theo into the monster's pit. The soldiers then take the remaining young men. After Theo is thrown into the pit, the young men are sent into the maze one by one through different openings hidden within the palace. Theo hears the screams of his friends echoing throughout the pit, unsure of what to do. He then hears heavy breathing behind him, followed by a terrifying roar. The monster charges at its first victim to devour her, who happens to be the girl who believed their actions were a duty. Unfortunately, her scream spreads throughout the maze. Theo begins wandering the maze and smells a strange odor emanating from the rocks, realizing it's a type of gas similar to what Deucalion used in the skull. After inhaling the gas, Theo starts hallucinating and imagines seeing his beloved in front of him. But then, he hears a sound resembling rocks coming from the end of the tunnel. When he goes there, he finds Morna, who cannot speak. She uses the sound to guide her companions to her, just as she did with Theo. When she communicates with him through sign language, he doesn't understand her. Suddenly, they hear a scream and run toward the sound to save their friend. Meanwhile, we see Wally, who is utterly terrified, calling for help. When she moves the rocks in front of her to escape, she finds a decayed corpse, becoming even more distressed and screaming. Suddenly, Dano appears, but Wally screams even louder in shock. At this moment, Theo and Morna arrive, and the 4 start thinking about what to do. Wally insists on leaving the place as soon as possible, but the others say they must search for the rest first, even though they don't know if they are still alive. At the same time, Raffaella is taken to Deucalion to marry her, but when she sees one of the pits open, she runs and stands over it, declaring she is willing to sacrifice herself to the monster rather than marry Deucalion. Meanwhile, Theo and the others reach the place where the girl was killed, finding blood and remains everywhere, as well as the monster's massive footprints. While trying to estimate its size, Tyro suddenly arrives, puts his hand to his mouth, and tells the others to stay quiet because the monster is nearby. He declares that he will kill the monster himself, but needs someone to act as bait. Theo volunteers, and the others hide nearby, armed with weapons they found in the maze, waiting for the monster to approach to attack it. After a while, they hear something approaching and pounce on it, only to discover it's Rafaela. She tells them she has come to help and knows the way out. She also informs them that her helper is waiting for them at the exit. However, Wally doesn't trust her and decides to leave. Theo tries to stop her, but she starts arguing with everyone, saying she doesn't care about anyone and is ashamed to have been born in this village, blaming it for everything happening to them. While she is ranting, the monster appears from behind and kills her with one of its horns. Everyone runs as soon as they see the monster. After running a bit, they find their friend Didi unconscious, but Rafaela helps her wake up, and they continue toward the exit Rafaela mentioned. At the same time, her helper is waiting at the door, but Deucalion arrives and kills her. When they finally reach the door, Rafaela calls for her helper to open it, but no one responds. They begin to panic and try to break the door, especially as they hear the monster approaching. Unfortunately, they fail to escape in time and see the massive monster charging at them. It strikes one of the young men, roars loudly, and kills its new victim with its horns, swinging them violently. Theo, Dano, and Morna run in one direction, while Rafaela gets trapped and can't escape with them. Didi and Tyron flee to a distant part of the maze, where they find water and drink to quench their thirst. Meanwhile, Theo and the others run aimlessly until they encounter a strange man who claims he has been there for a long time, surviving on rats and insects. He offers to lead them to a safe place and introduces himself as Tarag. He takes them to a small opening between the rocks and shows them a map he made of the area, explaining that he's been there for a long time. The man seems crazy, rambling incoherently, but amidst his nonsense, he reveals crucial information. The creature can be subdued when it sleeps. Theo listens intently to this. In the next scene, we see that Rafaela is still alive, having escaped the monster, wandering through the maze. Meanwhile, Deucalion yells at the creature while standing near one of the openings, declaring he will go down and retrieve Rafaela himself. We see this reckless man entering the maze through a door. At this point, Theo becomes convinced that Wally is still alive. He pressures Tarag to tell him her location, believing that since Tarag has survived there for so long, he must know. However, their shouting and arguing attract the monster's attention, which comes to their location and begins pushing the rocks to collapse the area. At that moment, it hears Deucalion calling for Rafaela and heads toward him. And when the coward Diocleon hears the monster's roar approaching, he immediately exits through the door, abandoning the soldier he brought with him, who is swallowed by the monster as soon as it sees him. Meanwhile, Theo pressures Traj to reveal the location of his beloved. When Theo finds the necklace with the pendant he gave her, he becomes more convinced that she is still alive. He takes the map Traj drew and forces him to point out her location. After Traj directs him to a specific spot, Theo decides to head there. At the same time, Didi and Tyro are wandering aimlessly, gradually growing fond of each other. Tyro promises her that he will get her out of this place. They reach one of the castle's entrances and decide to climb out. After Tyro climbs up and reaches the iron bars, he calls for Didi to climb after him and grab his hand. But as she climbs the wall, the monster arrives and stands beneath them. Despite Tyro telling her not to look down, Didi doesn't listen. Unfortunately, she looks down, sees the monster, and falls, screaming, which draws the monster's attention. Sadly, she loses her grip and falls onto the monster's horns. Meanwhile, as Theo wanders the maze, he starts hearing his beloved's voice. Suddenly, she appears before him. Overjoyed, he runs to her, embraces her, only to realize he's hugging her skeleton. This harsh reality makes him realize he must now help his friends who need him. He moves on, searching for Dano and the rest of his friends. At the same time, Dano asks Morna to hide in his secret shelter. He then sets out to look for Theo. When Dano sees a shadow ahead, he calls out to it, but he senses something is wrong. As he approaches for a clearer view, he realizes it's the shadow of the monster coming to kill him. Understanding he can't escape, he calls out to Theo, telling him to take care of Morna. During this time, Theo hears his friend's voice coming from all directions, unsure where to go. Suddenly, he hears Dano scream as the monster kills him. Enraged, Theo throws the metal pendant against the wall, which creates a spark. This spark ignites a fire, giving Theo hope that they might survive and escape this place. Rafaela then appears and reveals the truth about the Minotaur and the reason behind the sacrifices. She tells Theo that the prince was killed by the Minotaur, and that, to cover up the scandal, they fabricated a story blaming a man from Theo's village. This was done to force the villagers to offer sacrifices as compensation. Rafaela encourages Theo to fight and defeat the monster. She also takes him to the gas source to prepare him for what's to come. However, while there, the monster attacks them with a loud roar. At this moment, Tyro arrives, furious and grieving Didi's loss. He tells Theo to escape and charges at the monster. The monster, in turn, attacks Tyro with its horns, but Tyro continues to fight. Theo leaves Rafaela in a safe spot, instructing her to hide underwater when the monster appears. He then returns to face the monster. When he arrives, he finds he cannot save Tyro, who has already died. Overcome with anger, Theo shouts and calls out to the monster, luring it toward him. The monster charges at Theo, but Theo jumps at the last moment, dodging the attack. The monster crashes into the wall, creating more space for the gas to spread. The monster, now dizzy from the gas, has part of its horn broken. Theo searches for the pendant to ignite the fire, but notices it hanging from the monster's horn. As the monster stumbles in a different direction, Theo leaps onto it, retrieves the pendant, and heads back to the same spot. The monster sees Theo and chases him again, but Theo changes direction and goes to Rafaela to escape the fire. Along the way, he strikes the pendant against the walls until it finally creates a spark. The fire spreads rapidly, and Theo reaches Rafaela just in time. The fire engulfs the area, killing the monster. The explosion is so powerful that it breaks through to the castle above, killing Diocleon and his servants as the bull statue collapses on them. Theo and Rafaela escape underwater. Diocleon and his servants perish in the explosion. Emerging from the water, Theo and Rafaela are still fearful of the monster. Suddenly, they hear footsteps behind them and discover that the Minotaur is still alive, though gravely injured. As soon as it sees Theo, it attacks. In that moment, Theo spots the broken horn lying nearby. He grabs it and stabs it into the monster's mouth. However, the monster fiercely charges at Theo, pushing him against the wall. This causes the horn to pierce through the monster's body, killing it. Afterward, Theo and Rafaela search for an exit from the maze. Along the way, Theo finds Morna and Traj still hiding. He calls out to them and takes them along. As they walk, the place begins to collapse. The group continues until they find an exit and see sunlight. They find themselves in the main hall, where Diocleon lies severely injured but still alive. Rafaela approaches him and strangles him to ensure a better future for the people. And thus concludes the events of our film today. Stay tuned for more videos.
Welcome to CinePro, where we bring your favorite movies back to life with quick recaps, hidden details, and everything you missed. The movie begins with a girl named Sam walking alone on the street. We learn that she is talking to her boyfriend on the phone and arrives at the cinema. However, the strange thing is that she sees her name on one of the movie posters and is confused. She decides to go inside. She notices that the place is completely empty, and no one is in the theater except her. Eventually, something pulls her into a chair to watch the movie, and she sees herself drowning, covered in blood, attacked by someone she doesn't know. Then a killer appears, chasing her through the forest until she falls and sees a corpse in front of her. Naturally, she can't believe what's happening. At that moment, her friend Jack shows up to ask her to calm down for a bit until they get out of the forest onto the road, where they see the police. They try to ask for help, but the officer, Tom, doesn't believe there's a killer in the forest attacking people. Tom drives them in his car, but the killer reappears. Tom tries to approach him to get a better look, but ends up shooting him quickly. The killer falls onto the car, and Tom claims he has finished him off. Unfortunately, Tom collapses and accidentally kills himself, and the killer rises again. Jack immediately flees with Sam back into the forest. They come across an old-looking house and knock on the door in a hurry. It turns out to be the apartment of their friend Mike. Sam tries to explain what just happened, but before she can say much, the killer reappears at the door and throws a weapon at Mike, knocking him down. Jack tries to shut the door quickly before the killer enters the house. Jack prepares all the weapons to defend themselves, but the door is easily broken down. The killer manages to kill Mike with an iron rod. Jack grabs a weapon from the ground, but accidentally shoots his friend instead of the killer. Sam realizes this person is impossible to kill and decides to escape. She runs to the basement. Jack tries to resist the killer, but is overpowered and killed as well. In the basement, Sam finds herself surrounded by terrifying corpses. After a while, she hears Jack screaming, but doesn't realize he's being burned alive. She understands she must defend herself courageously. A fight ensues between her and the killer in the living room. He falls to the ground, and just before she finishes him off, she discovers that he is her old friend. He tells her the story. Some time ago, they were all gathered in the forest to celebrate when they noticed something falling rapidly from the sky. They went to investigate and found wreckage. Jack tried to touch it, but it turned into insects that attacked the entire group. Fred managed to escape to the basement, where he found a welder's mask. The insects couldn't reach his body. In the end, Fred decided to kill all his friends to free them from the insects' control. He began killing them one by one. Finally, Sam realizes she must act quickly. A spider emerges from her head, and she asks Fred to kill her to free her from the curse. Before she can finish her plea, he does so. Fred leaves the house, but the insects control him and surround him. He tries to escape. Later, we see him on the road, heading back to the house. Unfortunately, a spider has already taken control of him, and he returns to the city to spread the infection. The scene shifts to a couple, David and Anna, entering the empty theater. They notice the movie starts playing by itself. In the film, we see Anna has a birthmark on her face. David doesn't mind it, but suggests she undergo surgery to remove it, offering to cover all the costs. Anna agrees because she loves him. The next day, they go to the hospital. The doctor reassures her that the procedure will be simple and can remove 90% of the birthmark. She enters the operating room. After some time, she wakes up, imagining herself healed and happy about her upcoming marriage to David. But then the doctor appears, his clothes covered in blood. She sees a nurse with David, who reassures her that everything is better now. He tries to take a photo of her as they leave the hospital. Later, the doctor checks on her, and she asks when the bandages will be removed. He tells her not to do anything without his permission. Frustrated, she tries to contact someone, but no one answers. She approaches the receptionist nurse, but before she can speak, the nurse is called to the operating room, leaving the computer unattended. Anna searches for her name and discovers a strange operation was performed on her. Terrified, she goes to the bathroom, where she encounters a terrifying faceless figure. Suddenly, the nurse reappears, and Anna hits her with a bottle, taking her access card to escape the hospital. She gets into the elevator, but before she can leave, the doctor appears again, asking where she's going. He injects her with a sedative. The next day, she feels better about the operation and decides to remove the bandages. To her horror, her face looks terrifying. At that moment, Nadia, David's mother, enters the room. Anna screams when she realizes her face now resembles Nadia's, who had taken her original face. Anna wakes up again in the theater, searching for David. She realizes she's alone and approaches the projection equipment. She sees a mysterious figure and screams loudly. The second scene ends here. The story then shifts to Father Frank, who also notices his name on the screen and enters the theater to uncover the story. He finds it empty. The film starts, showing his time at a nun-run school. A boy tries to harm himself, and a nun attempts to save him. But strange events occur, and the boy falls from the church. The students become very scared, and at night, Danny is frightened by what happened to her friend and is afraid to be alone. The nun tries to calm her down a bit and tells her that Father Frank is with them until they hear a sound coming from the hallways, and blood is everywhere on the statues. Here, a strange figure appears on the corner, and the next day, Danny is sitting alone because she is upset about her friend Peter, who had committed suicide the day before, until a group of girls approaches her to bully her. Strangely, she defends herself with great strength and throws the girl away from her, as if a demonic entity is helping her. Here, the girl falls to the ground and starts screaming. The moment she sees a terrifying entity standing behind Danny, she can't understand how this is happening in the place. At night, all the girls wake up at the same time, and we learn that they are under the control of the entity. The nun is sitting alone in the office to read a bit about demons. In the end, she realizes that what happened to the girls is not normal, and she needs to send a message to Frank. But here, Peter's ghost appears in the place, and we learn that his spirit is inside Danny's body. They must perform an exorcism on her. Before they can do that, the mother arrives in the room just in time. Of course, she takes her daughter to leave the church quickly, but the father realizes that the spirit is in the mother, not the daughter. She goes to the ward quickly, and here she manages to control more than one girl. When the nun goes to the room, she sees Danny tied up with her mouth stitched shut. Chaos ensues in the entire ward because of the entity, and they attack Father Frank to finish him off until Danny's mother goes to the rooftop. We learn that she also wants to commit suicide, and unfortunately, the children finish off Father Frank. The nun tries to save the mother in any way, and before she can do so, she manages to grab her, and both fall to the ground together. Unfortunately, the mother dies here, and the nun is still alive. The evil spirit transfers into her after the mother's death. The show ends here, and Father Frank doesn't understand anything. Before he can figure out what exactly happened, the owner of the place arrives on the scene, and here he hits him on the head to knock him out. The last person we have is named Helen, who enters the stage and sees her video playing in a mental health hospital. Here she sees herself with two of her children, who are bullying her because she's not normal. She looks around at everything and is surprised that she's even being treated here. She enters her session to talk to the doctor, and here, before she can say anything, he receives a call, and Helen learns that her session is over at this point. Of course, she tries to leave the hospital quickly, and she notices that the place around her has completely changed. She can't find the children who were there before. A figure appears walking ahead of her, and she tries to follow him, but he doesn't hear her. She keeps walking after him, and he looks very terrifying. She keeps asking about what happened to her children until she sees a strange vision and pulls out a weapon from her bag to end her life. Before she can do anything, she hears the voices of her children in the place, so she keeps walking toward the source of the sound until she reaches an old door and sees the shadows of her children. Here, they appear in front of her, and she manages to finish off the doctor and takes the children to leave that place. The movie ends here. Afterward, we see that the weapon is still in her bag, and she contemplates suicide again until she actually does it. Then we move to a child named Ray, and of course, like everyone else before him, he notices his name on the stage, so he goes inside, until he sees himself on a very important day, playing music in front of his family. After that, everyone is happy with the beautiful performance. The day ends like that, and they leave the venue to return home. Here, a criminal appears to threaten the family, saying he will kill them unless they give him some money. Chaos ensues, and he manages to kill the whole family. Ray tries to escape quickly from the place, but unfortunately, he gets shot in the chest. Afterward, he's taken to the hospital and keeps asking about what happened that night. The kidnapper arrives at the room to finish the job, but before that happens, the nurse also enters the room and tells him that visiting hours ended a while ago. After a while, he meets someone named Casey, and through their conversation, we learn that they have the ability to see death in any place. The next day, Ray's mother arrives at the hospital and tells him to recover quickly so he can leave again, until Casey enters the room and keeps talking to him for a while so he won't listen to his mother, saying he needs to stay here. After she leaves the room, and before she moves anywhere, the mother appears in front of her to finish her off. Ray is left alone in the room, and the killer appears to finish him off for good. He tries to hide anywhere and only finds the refrigerators. Here, he ends up with Casey's corpse, but unfortunately, the killer finds his location and goes to kill him until he has a vision of the mother and Casey. He keeps fighting back until he finishes him off, and our show ends here. After that, the theater owner appears to ask him to escape because he doesn't kill children, and this happens before he dies. In the end, we learn that anyone who enters this cinema dies afterward, and the movie ends here. So don't forget, if you like the movie, to give the video a like and subscribe. Hey film fans! Welcome to Cine Pro, your ultimate hub for all movie recaps. From heartwarming classics to the latest blockbusters, our movie begins with a masked man preparing a room and setting up a timer. This man starts kidnapping 9 individuals from different locations. The kidnapping incident spread, and the police are unable to determine the cause. The masked man enters the room he prepared after gathering the 9 individuals there, removes the blindfolds from their faces, and tells them that he brought them together for a specific reason. They are all connected to this reason, and their lives depend on figuring it out. If they discover the reason, they will be released, and he will call the police to inform them of their location and confess to all his crimes. He tells them he will return in 10 minutes, throws chalk on the floor in case they want to write something, presses a button to free one of their hands, activates the timer for 9 minutes, leaves, and locks the door behind him. Each of them begins trying to identify the others, asking if anyone knows why they are in the room. Everyone tries to remember what they might have done to deserve being locked in a room awaiting death. One of them admits that he is a criminal who was accused of rape, confessing to the group that he indeed committed rape. Everyone wishes for his death, as he truly deserves it. He tells them that everyone should reflect on their own actions. At least he confessed to what he will be killed for. Each person introduces themselves. The first is Eddie, who works in insurance. Then there's Dean, a police officer who initially tries to hide his job to avoid scaring them. There's Kelly, a lawyer in the public prosecutor's office. Sully, a drug dealer who owns a casino. And Kristen, a pharmacy student who was arrested and jailed for selling drugs he had bought from Sully in the past. They are the only 2 who know each other. There's Father Michael, Kogan, the rapist who confessed, and finally, Leonie, who claims the masked man's goal is just to scare them and that he won't actually kill anyone. Among them is a Chinese woman whose language they don't understand and who they don't bother to engage with. The 10 minutes given by the masked man run out, and he enters, asking if they've figured out why they're there. Kelly pleads with him for more time. The masked man selects the first victim, Kristen, whispers the reason for his presence into his ear, then shoots him in front of everyone, killing him. The group realizes that this is not just a scare tactic. The masked man tells them that the 10-minute timer will start again, then drags Kristen's body out of the room, locking the door behind him. Leonie starts talking about himself, admitting that the only thing he ever did wrong was stealing a weapon from a house after assaulting its owner, then fleeing. He was never caught or jailed. Eddie shares that he works in insurance, and that all he did was falsify documents for clinical trials for hepatitis patients to get his relative into the trials instead of someone else. He believes he doesn't deserve to die for this, as he was trying to do good. Dean confesses to having an affair with Kelly behind his wife's back, which led to his wife divorcing him, and Kelly almost losing her job due to the scandal. Their relationship ended, and they stopped seeing each other. Dean insists his wife couldn't be behind this, as she's out of the country and has no connection to anyone in the room. The masked man is monitoring them through a hidden camera in the room, recording everything. Leonie suggests that Sully break his hand to free himself from the handcuffs and try to rescue everyone. Sully repeatedly hits Leonie's hand until he manages to break it, allowing Leonie to escape from the cuffs. However, Leonie declares that he has no intention of helping anyone else and runs out of the room. He keeps walking through the corridors until the masked man attacks him. Leonie manages to grab the masked man's gun and threatens him with it. The masked man tells him that he has been planning this for 2 years and wouldn't be foolish enough to give him a loaded gun. Leonie tries to fire the gun but finds it empty. He runs from the masked man, who shoots him in the leg, causing him to fall. The masked man drags him back to the room, ties up his uninjured hand, and looks at the others, asking again why they think they're there. When no one answers, he approaches Kogan, whispers the reason for his presence into his ear, then shoots and kills him. He unties Kogan's body, drags it out of the room, and before leaving, tells Leonie that he's next. The group begins to suspect that Kelly might know the Chinese woman, as the woman draws a face on the floor with the chalk. Kelly suddenly remembers that she was responsible for a case involving the Chinese woman named Chan, who was robbed, and identified the thief, Greeley, who was then imprisoned. They suspect they are all being held because of Greeley's imprisonment, though the others have no direct connection to him. Leonie speaks up, admitting that he committed murder before. He killed his brother during an arms trade deal, disposed of the body in a remote location, and attended the funeral with his mother without anyone knowing he was the killer. He also sold the remaining weapons. He tells them that since he's going to die anyway, he overheard the masked man saying he had been planning this for 2 years. This means what they're being punished for must have happened 2 years ago. Each person tries to recall what they did 2 years ago. The 10 minutes end, and the masked man returns, asking once again if they figured out the reason for their imprisonment. When no one responds, he kills Leonie, drags his body out of the room, locks the door, and restarts the 10-minute timer. Father Michael finally speaks up, saying he knows the reason they're there and why this is happening to them. However, what he knows comes from a confidential confession in the church, and he cannot reveal it. He continues talking about Chan's case, hoping it's the reason for their imprisonment. Michael admits that Greeley didn't actually rob Chan's store. Someone else confessed to the crime, but another person was imprisoned in his place. Michael couldn't reveal this information due to the sanctity of confession. Eddie speculates that Kristen must have confessed to the crime, as he was the most religious among them, making Greeley innocent. Since Kristen owed money to Sully, he likely stole to repay his debt, making Sully complicit in Greeley's imprisonment. Dean writes everything down on the wall, trying to come up with a clear answer for the masked man. The 10 minutes run out again, and the masked man enters the room. He knows that no one has reached the answer he's waiting for. Sully tries to provoke him to kill him and end his imprisonment, but the masked man tells him that it's not his turn yet, and that Eddie is the one who will die. But before he shoots Eddie, Michael sacrifices his life and dies in his place. The masked man drags Michael's body and leaves the room. However, Kelly speaks to him, telling him that they know the reason they're imprisoned. It's because they wrongfully imprisoned Greeley and that he is Greeley. But the masked man looks at her and says he's not Greeley. He looks at her again and reiterates that he is not Greeley, explaining that he's been organizing their thoughts from the beginning. He says he got out of prison and had money, bought a gun from Leon, who was dealing in weapons, and returned it to Chan's shop before robbing it. Michael knew what happened but didn't speak about it. He adds that he, Dean, and Coogan had nothing to do with the theft. Before they could continue their conversation, the 10 minutes were up. The masked man enters again, hands a paper to Chan explaining the reason for her death, and kills her in front of them. Kelly tries to plead with the masked man to spare her, telling him her son needs her and she must return to him. The masked man tells her that her son was cared for by his nanny and then placed in a boarding school because she was too busy to take care of him. He adds that she hid her pregnancy from the boy's father before separating from him. He looks at Dean and leaves the room, and Dean realizes he is the father of her son and that she hid it from him all this time. Kelly breaks down in front of them and confesses what she did. She was forced to frame Greeley to prove herself in her position and support herself and her son, especially after her relationship with Dean was exposed. She needed to win the case at any cost, so she tampered with the evidence to incriminate Greeley and got Dean to help her without him knowing she had altered the evidence. They continue piecing together what happened to Eddie and Greeley until time runs out. The masked man enters and kills Sully because it's his turn, resetting the timer. Eddie tries to connect all the pieces, saying the whole matter started with Christian, who borrowed money from Sully and after losing it, bought a weapon from Leon and robbed Chan's shop. Chan misidentified Greeley as the culprit, and Kelly manipulated the evidence to convict him, with Dean unknowingly aiding her. After Christian confessed to Michael, Michael refused to report him. As a result, Greeley went to prison, where he met Coogan and was harmed by him. Coogan might have been sick and transmitted his illness to Greeley, which is why the masked man warned them to avoid contact with his blood, as he had a blood-transmissible disease like hepatitis. Then it's Eddie's turn, as he once decided which patients would receive a new treatment for hepatitis. Eddie likely denied Greeley treatment because he lacked insurance and had a criminal record. This ties all 9 people to Greeley's death. Their time runs out, and the masked man enters, explains to Eddie why. They're here, removes his mask, revealing himself to be Greeley's father. He tells them his son wasn't at fault for what happened to him, and his only crime was becoming part of their lives, which ruined his. He says he will release them and hopes what happened will haunt them forever. The first person Greeley's father unties is Kelly, who immediately attacks him, takes his gun, and shoots him. She tells the others she won't let anyone leave knowing her story, which could ruin her life and career. She kills Eddie, then Dean, ensuring she eliminates them all. Greeley's father stands up and tells her that before untying her, he called the police, and everything that happened has been recorded, meaning her life is already over. She shoots him in the head, then tries to escape the police before they can arrest her for the crime she committed. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an updates. See you in the next. Welcome to Cinepro, where we bring your favorite movies back to life with quick recaps, hidden details, and everything you missed. The movie starts with a strange man, and we'll temporarily call him the Stranger. He wakes up in what seems to be a mass grave. Naturally, he's terrified. The Stranger can't remember anything, not even his own name, which makes the situation even scarier. While he's still trying to process everything, a girl appears above the pit, looks down at him, and then walks away. Shortly after, the Stranger finds a gun on one of the bodies in the pit and decides to keep it. Moments later, the same girl returns and throws him a rope. He uses it to climb out of the pit. Once he's out, the Stranger finds himself in the middle of a forest. He wanders around until he stumbles upon a house and decides to go inside. Inside the house, he encounters an unusual scene. The girl who helped him earlier is there, along with 3 other people, 2 men and another woman. We learn that the girl's name is Sharon, and the 2 men are Lucas and Michael. There's also a man lying on the floor who looks dead. The Stranger raises his gun, pointing it at everyone, and demands to know who they are. Lucas then pulls out his own weapon and accuses the Stranger of being the one who killed all the people in the pit. The Stranger doesn't respond, as he has no memory of anything. Amid the tense standoff, the seemingly dead man suddenly wakes up, revealing that he was only unconscious. This calms everyone down, and they start talking. The group explains to the Stranger that they all woke up in the house with no memory of who they are or how they got there. All they know is that one of them woke up with an ID card and a car key, but the car isn't anywhere nearby. From the ID card, they learned their names and little else. The man who just regained consciousness is named Ness. As for the girl who helped the Stranger, she is mute and communicates in a language no one understands. Although it seems like she knows something, she can't explain it to the others. The Stranger tries to communicate with her but fails. Lucas, on the other hand, remains suspicious of the Stranger, especially since he woke up in the pit with no explanation. The stranger insists that he remembers nothing, just like the rest of them, and suggests they search the house for clues about their identities. The group agrees and begins exploring the house. While searching, the stranger finds a calendar with a specific date marked, the 18th of the month, a day that hasn't arrived yet. He feels that something significant will happen on that day and suspects the mute girl knows the secret behind it. He shows her the calendar and asks her to explain, but she can't. Meanwhile, Lucas discovers a safe filled with weapons. Michael selects one and starts loading it like a professional, though he has no memory of how he knows how to handle guns. Ness speculates that Michael might have been a soldier, which could explain his skills. No one dwells on this for long, as they decide to leave the house and explore the forest in hopes of finding a phone or any means of contacting the police. The stranger, Sharon, and Lucas set out, while Michael stays behind with the mute girl. As the group searches the forest, they come across a cabin. Inside, they find a woman who looks strange, doesn't speak, and keeps screaming. She resembles a zombie and is eating some bizarre food. The moment she sees the stranger, she becomes aggressive and tries to attack him. He punches her, knocking her unconscious. Back at the house, Ness and Michael continue searching for clues. Ness finds a collection of books in various languages and realizes he can read them all, including Latin and French. Most of the books are about anatomy, and Ness understands them perfectly, leading Michael to suggest that the house might belong to Ness. Ness starts to believe this might be true. When the others return to the house, Ness speaks to the stranger in Latin, and the stranger understands him perfectly. This surprises Ness, who begins to feel that he and the stranger might have been close in some way, perhaps friends, but he can't remember. The next day, Ness, the stranger, Lucas, and Sharon decide to explore the forest again, hoping to uncover more answers. Michael stays behind with the mute girl and tries to communicate with her. He confesses that he feels a connection to her, even love, but doesn't know why. He asks her to share anything she remembers, but she remains unable to communicate. Suddenly, Michael hears screaming coming from somewhere in the forest. He tells the mute girl to hide inside the house while he grabs a weapon and heads toward the source of the noise. He finds a man trapped in barbed wire screaming for help. Michael tries to assist him, and he unties him. But this person keeps strangling him with the barbed wire he has. Then he grabs something like a knife and tries to help him untie himself, but ends up grabbing a knife and starting a fight. He begins to bleed and die. On the other side, there was Wands and Sharon searching in the forest. They search until they find people tied to trees, dead, and looking in terrible shape. But no one pays attention to them at the moment. They continue wandering in the forest until they find some cars. They open them and check inside, only to find that each car has very little fuel, not enough to take them anywhere. They find a picture in one of the cars showing Lucas, Michael, Wands, Sharon, and the mute girl together. At that moment, Lucas tells everyone that the stranger is not with them, making it clear that he doesn't belong to their group and isn't trustworthy as he claimed. But the stranger says it's very possible that he was the one who took that picture. Still, Lucas doesn't trust him at all. Therefore, Lucas tells everyone that they won't move the cars for now. Everyone agrees with him, and they continue wandering in the forest until they reach Michael, who is taking his last breaths. At that moment, the mute girl comes and starts crying over him, very sad because it seems she loved him or something, as Michael had hinted before. The stranger who killed Michael starts screaming, so the stranger pulls out his gun and shoots him, finishing him off. After all that happened, they agree with the stranger and decide to take one of the cars and drive it, hoping to find something because staying in their current state isn't an option. They indeed take a car and start driving until they reach a strange building that looks like a hospital. Inside the building, there's a locked room. The stranger approaches the room to see who's inside. He finds a child inside, terrified of the stranger, repeatedly saying he knows him and calling him Jonah. From here, we learn that the stranger's real name is Jonah. The child keeps telling Jonah to leave because he's not one of them, and warns that many people will come and kill everyone. The child pleads with Jonah to leave. Jonah, however, insists on knowing who he is and what the child is talking about. But the child doesn't open the door. Jonah takes out his gun and starts shooting at the door to open it, but fails. Eventually, Sharon takes him away, and they leave. As they walk, Jonah tells Sharon that he feels like he knows her and even loves her, though he doesn't know how or why. He doesn't even know who she is. While walking, they encounter a tree blocking the road. They get out to move it, only to be surprised by a group of people working on cutting trees. Jonah tries to talk to them, but it turns out to be a mistake because these people don't speak and act like madmen, almost like zombies. They start chasing Jonah to kill him. Jonah quickly runs back to the car, but it won't start. He keeps trying to push it, but it still won't work. Suddenly, Jonah notices that the strange people have stopped chasing him. He looks ahead and sees corpses hanging from a tree. Realizing that these bodies were deliberately placed there as a scare tactic for these strange people, Jonah feels that someone hung these bodies specifically to scare off the strange people, but no one knows who did it. Meanwhile, Lucas and the mute girl are at the house. Lucas begins to feel strange and tells everyone that he has a severe headache. He starts acting strangely, grabbing the mute girl's hand violently and telling her he knows her. Wands pulls him away and tells him to rest. Later, Wands talks to the mute girl and tells her he wants to go to the cabin where the strange woman was because he feels like he knows her well and might remember something there. The mute girl agrees and takes Wands there before leaving. Alone, Wands explores the place, feeling familiar with it. As he searches, he finds a pair of glasses and realizes they belong to him. He puts them on and keeps exploring until he finds the strange woman whose name he finally remembers, Helen. He asks Helen to remind him of something, but she doesn't respond, and instead tries to attack him. Wands locks her in the room to prevent her from harming him. Afterward, Wands leaves the place and notices that everyone around him looks strange, almost monstrous. Wands points his gun at them to keep them away. Meanwhile, Lucas is still feeling a severe headache and acting insane. He starts chasing the mute girl again, but she hides from him. Lucas gives up searching and goes down to the basement of the house, where he finds many screens displaying surveillance footage from the cabin, if you remember. Lucas also finds a small camera. He plays a video stored on it which shows Jonah conducting experiments on people. Jonah says he's close to finding a cure, but the cure has side effects, such as causing memory loss. Jonah tries to improve the cure and begins documenting the people he's experimenting on, including Lucas and the mute girl. At this moment, Lucas realizes that Jonah is the one responsible for everything that happened to them. Lucas waits for Jonah and Sharon to return. When they arrive, Lucas confronts them, showing Sharon the video and explaining everything. Sharon believes him and becomes terrified of Jonah. Lucas forces Jonah to walk to the pit where the corpses are and throws him in again. Afterward, Lucas and Sharon return to the house, where the mute girl is. Lucas's condition worsens, and he tries to attack the mute girl. Sharon pulls out her gun and threatens him, scaring Lucas away. Sharon stays in the house and finds a collection of books and research. She starts reading them and begins to recall everything, shocked by what she remembers. Meanwhile, Jonah is in the pit when the mute girl throws him a rope, allowing him to climb out. Jonah tells the mute girl to stay away from him because he feels like he's an evil person. He says he needs to remember everything and wants everyone to stay away from him to avoid harming anyone. Jonah then returns to the hospital. This time, he starts remembering some things. He recalls being with someone and giving that person doses of the cure he invented. Jonah drew a map for this person and instructed them to follow it to meet the army and deliver the doses, as the army would arrive on the 18th. Until that happens, the plague at the time will spread. But it seems that Jonah was a scientist or something like that, and he was the creator of a specific cure for a certain plague. This plague is likely what turned people into the crazed individuals we've seen from the beginning until now. It's implied that the military was supposed to come and take the cure from Jonah on the 18th to distribute it around the world. However, Jonah was afraid the plague would spread further, so he sent someone to the military with the cure. After that, for some unclear reason, Jonah and the people with him forgot all about it. Jonah keeps wandering around the hospital until he encounters a strange-looking man and woman who also don't speak. The woman tries to attack Jonah, so he shoots her and leaves. Afterward, Jonah leaves the place and drives until his car breaks down. Suddenly, he sees the child Jonah he had seen earlier, accompanied by an elderly woman, a completely deranged girl, and a savage young woman. Jonah tries to talk to them, and the elderly woman tells him that he's not like them and shouldn't get close. She also tells him that she could kill him, but chooses not to because she's not like him. She leaves, taking some of her belongings in a car and driving away. Meanwhile, Jonah finds a crashed car nearby. Inside, he discovers the same person he had sent to deliver the cure to the military. That person is dead, but the cure is still with them. Jonah takes the cure and decides to keep it, still not fully understanding what's going on. In the car, Jonah also finds a picture of himself with Sharon, realizing that they were truly in love, or possibly engaged. Amidst all this, Lucas arrives in a car and crashes into the car with the dead man inside. Lucas gets out, completely deranged, and tries to kill Jonah. Jonah tries to explain that he's not evil and was likely trying to help Lucas and everyone else, but Lucas doesn't listen and keeps trying to kill him. Jonah picks up a rock, hits Lucas with it, and kills him. Suddenly, Jonah starts to remember bits of his past. He recalls being with Ness, Sharon, Michael, the mute woman, and even Lucas. From these memories, Jonah realizes that they were all doctors, and Ness was his brother. They were there trying to find a cure for a certain plague that had spread across the world, turning people into savage, crazed individuals like the ones we've seen. But things spiraled out of control. Jonah remembers a time when they were all together, and a savage woman attacked them, trying to kill them. At the time, Jonah and Ness blamed each other for failing to control the disease before it spread so widely. That's all Jonah remembers for now. Meanwhile, we shift to Ness, who also starts remembering everything and is just as shocked as Jonah. He heads to the house where Sharon is, remembering that she was Jonah's fiancée. Sharon, too, has remembered everything. They decide to tell Jonah everything because they believe he hasn't remembered yet. They stay there until the next day. The next day, they find that many savages have surrounded the house. They start shooting at them, killing as many as they can. At one point, Sharon writes everything she remembers in a letter for Jonah, in case they all die. Amidst all this, a group of people arrives and starts killing the savages. Ness realizes that these people are soldiers from the rescue team that was supposed to take them on the 18th. He leaves Sharon to go meet them. However, the strange thing is that the soldiers shoot Ness and kill him in a shocking scene. Jonah arrives at the location and is devastated to find his brother dead. He realizes that the rescue team wasn't there to save them, but to kill everyone to prevent the plague from spreading further. They weren't there to take the cure or anyone alive as they had thought. Jonah finds Sharon, who tells him she remembers everything. He takes her, and they try to escape. Suddenly, a savage woman attacks Sharon and stabs her. Jonah kills the savage woman and takes the injured Sharon with him, hiding in a glass pit to avoid the soldiers. After some time, the soldiers arrive, dump a few bodies into the pit, which turn out to be the boy, the elderly woman, and the savage girl who were with Jonah earlier, and leave after confirming no one is alive. Jonah tries to save Sharon but fails. She asks him to take a dose of the anti-serum to protect himself from the plague and gives him the letter she wrote before dying peacefully. Jonah injects himself with the serum and loses consciousness. When he wakes up, he finds the letter beside him. Through the letter, he finally remembers everything. We learn that Jonah, Sharon, Michael, Ness, Lucas, and the mute woman were there because a plague had spread across the world, turning people into savage, zombie-like creatures. The mute woman was immune to the virus and couldn't be infected. So they used her to develop a cure. They succeeded in creating a cure, but it had a minor side effect. It caused memory loss after a while. When they were all infected by the plague, they were forced to take the cure to survive. As a result, when they woke up, they couldn't remember anything. The mute woman remembered everything because she didn't need to take the cure and was immune. Now everyone is dead. Lucas was infected with a secondary form of the plague, forcing Jonah to kill him. Ness was killed by the rescue soldiers, who decided it was better to eliminate everyone than risk the plague spreading further. They didn't know there was a cure, and when they found no evidence of one, they killed everyone to prevent the situation from worsening. Sharon and Michael were killed by the very savages they were trying to cure. In the end, Jonah survives and remembers everything thanks to Sharon's letter. The mute woman comes to Jonah, throws him a rope, and helps him climb out of the pit. Jonah and the mute woman decide to continue their mission to eradicate the plague, knowing that if they fail, it will destroy the world. And that's where the movie ends. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an updates. See you in the next Hey film fans! Welcome to Cinepro, your ultimate hub for all movie recaps, from heartwarming classics to the latest blockbusters. Our movie begins with Linda, who is staying over at her friend Sarah's house. In front of them is a box containing belongings of Sarah's recently deceased mother. Inside the box, they find a Polaroid camera, a type of camera that takes instant photos. The picture develops immediately and comes out of the camera. Sarah decides she wants to take a picture with it to send to her boyfriend so he can have the only copy. Linda takes Sarah's photo with the camera, and at the moment of the picture, a shadow appears and then disappears instantly. As it's late, Linda leaves and heads home. Later, she goes downstairs to lock her door and hears a sound coming from the camera. When she picks it up, the sound stops. She looks at the photo and sees a shadow standing behind her. Suddenly, the lights go out and she senses movement in the house. She calls out for Linda, thinking she's playing a prank on her. She finds a small ball that has fallen from the attic storage. She climbs the ladder to see who threw it, but she falls off the ladder for no apparent reason and sees a terrifying figure grabbing her hand. She backs away and falls through the opening, but before hitting the ground, she's pulled up and then falls down dead. We then move to Bird, a high school girl who loves photography. She tries to take a photo of her classmate whom she has a crush on. She works at a shop that repairs old gadgets because she loves vintage items. Her colleague Tyler tells her about an old camera being auctioned and gets it for her. She is thrilled because she knows the camera is from the 70s and is no longer manufactured. She notices an engraving on the camera from its previous owner. She tests it on Tyler to see if it works, taking her first picture with it. Afterward, Tyler tries to get closer to Bird, but she avoids him and leaves. He runs after her to give her the camera bag. Sarah's photo is in the box without Bird noticing it, but Tyler doesn't catch up to her. Bird heads home with her new camera, planning to photograph her dog, but the dog seems scared. Bird's friend Casey arrives to convince her to attend a costume party that night. Casey has prepared an outfit for her and insists she comes. Bird wears a Little Red Riding Hood costume and brings her camera to the party. Meanwhile, Tyler is closing the shop and finds photos left by his manager to test on the projector. He discovers a shadow in all the photos. Thinking someone is behind the curtain, he throws it aside but finds no one. He assumes the issue is with the projector. However, the curtain begins to rise on its own, and something attacks Tyler, killing him. Bird arrives at the party and tries to blend in, despite it being out of character for her. The party host, dressed as a witch, asks Bird to draw a tarot card. Bird picks a card symbolizing death, which makes her uneasy. She doesn't know anyone at the party until she sees someone in a scary mask staring at her. It turns out to be her classmate Connor, whom she has a crush on. He notices her camera, and she explains that it's a rare vintage camera she cherishes because of her love for photography. While they're talking, Devin and his girlfriend Mina ask Connor to take a selfie with them. Bird offers to take the photo with her camera. Casey joins them, making it 4 people in the photo. As Bird takes the picture, she sees a dark figure standing behind Connor. She waits for the photo to develop, but it looks normal. The party host Avery notices they've taken a picture without her and grabs Bird's camera to take a selfie. Before she can see her photo, someone calls her to the door, saying the police need to speak with her. The police then call Bird, informing her of Tyler's death at the shop and asking if she knows anyone who might have had a grudge against him. Bird's mother picks her up as she cries over Tyler's death. Back in her room, Bird notices the shadow in Tyler's photo has disappeared and moved to Avery's photo. She considers calling Avery to check on her but decides against it and goes to sleep. That night, Avery is at home cleaning up after the party. She takes everything to the basement and hears footsteps in her house. She searches for the source, even though the party is over. She sees 2 statues by the window in the dark, but notices there are now 3. Suddenly, a terrifying ghost rushes toward her. She tries to escape but falls into a spotlight and collapses. The ghost attacks and kills her. The next morning, Bird wakes up to go to school and gets a call from Casey, who informs her of Avery's death. Avery apparently fell down the basement stairs. Bird rushes to check the photos and sees that the shadow has indeed disappeared from Avery's photo and moved to the group photo, now standing behind Connor. Bird realizes the camera is cursed and is causing these deaths. She tries to destroy it, but a powerful force knocks her down, leaving the camera unharmed. She immediately goes to school to gather her friends and explain what has happened. She tells them the camera kills anyone photographed with it in order. Tyler was the first victim, followed by Avery. And now it's someone else's turn. No one believes her, and Devin mocks her for claiming to have a magical killer camera. He takes the photos from her to burn them. As soon as the fire reaches Mina's arm in the photo, her arm catches fire in real life. They manage to put out the flames only by extinguishing the photo first. The photo returns to its original state. Mina is rushed to the hospital to treat her burns. The group gathers to figure out how their lives have become tied to the photos. Bird recalls that Tyler got the camera from an online auction and that it came with just a bag. They wonder if the bag might contain something helpful. Bird decides to return to the shop where Tyler was killed to search for the bag. She goes in alone and manages to find the camera bag. Sensing movement around her, she tries to escape the way she entered, but she falls to the ground and finds the shadow approaching her. However, it is affected by the heat coming from the heater. She takes note of what is happening to it and continues escaping from the place. As she is leaving, with the shawl wrapped around her neck, it gets caught on a nail, so she removes it and heads to Connor, who is in his car. She wonders why this ghost is chasing her. Connor tells her, unfortunately, it appeared with them in the same photo, and the reason is that there was a window behind them in the picture. She is exposed to the same danger they are facing. She immediately calls Devin to inform him of what happened. His phone is in Mina's room, so Mina answers and tells her what she saw. She warns them never to be alone. As soon as Mina hangs up, the ghost appears in front of her and kills her. Devin returns to check on her and finds her strangled in front of him. It looks like a suicide. Bird and Connor arrive at the hospital and learn what happened. Devin fights with Bird, blaming her for everything happening to them, saying it's because of her camera. Bird cries and isolates herself in a quiet place. Connor comes to her and tells her it's not her fault, but she insists that she's always the cause of problems. Even her father's death was because she insisted he take a certain road to attend a party she wanted to go to. They had an accident on that road and he died because of her. She says that if he were alive now, he would have looked for a solution to what is happening. She decides there's no time for crying now. She rummages through the camera bag to see everything inside. She finds a paper indicating the camera was evidence in a murder case from 1974. They search the city's archives for any news of a murder reported in the newspapers in 1974. They find a report about the kidnapping and murder of 3 children by a photography teacher. The teacher's initials match the first 3 letters engraved on the camera. The abductor was so sick that he enjoyed photographing the children as he tortured them with his camera. Bird meets her friends to share what she found out. She tells them the ghost chased her in the store, but as soon as it encountered heat, it was affected. It's like photos that are disrupted by heat and only develop in darkness. The ghost behaves the same way. Devin loses his temper and decides to destroy the camera. Connor tries to calm him down, saying this won't help. Unfortunately, they both accidentally press the shutter button, taking a photo of Devin alone. When they look at the photo, they see the shadow has left the group photo and moved to Devin's solo picture. Devin grabs the camera and threatens anyone who comes near him. He decides to photograph Bird first, blaming her for everything. But Casey grabs Devin's photo and stabs it with a pin in the hand area. Devin's hand is affected in real life, causing him to drop the camera and become angrier. The police try to calm him, but he accidentally hits an officer. He spends the night in jail alone. Bird tries to explain what is happening to the sheriff to get Devin out of jail, but of course he doesn't believe them. He dismisses the idea of a ghost living in a camera. He tells them to forget everything they said and stay away from the house where the killer lived. As soon as they leave the station, they head to the killer's house to meet his wife, who changed her name to live in the city. They go to the house, and the woman allows them to talk to her after seeing the camera. She tells them the camera didn't belong to her husband but to her daughter, Rebecca. At the same time, the power goes out at the station, and the ghost appears to kill Devin in his cell. The woman tells them about her daughter, Rebecca, who was a very beautiful and quiet girl. She never liked leaving the house, until she got the camera as a gift. She became very attached to it, taking it everywhere. She faced even more bullying at school because of the camera she always carried. One day, 4 children tricked her into going out with them. They got her drunk, took pictures of her with her camera, and ruined her reputation. The next day, they spread the photos at school, causing her to commit suicide. When her father, the photography teacher, saw the pictures, he made the children suffer, photographing them as he did to his daughter before killing them. When the police raided his lab at school, they shot him. He fell into the developing chemicals with the camera and was electrocuted, dying with the camera in his hand. Although he managed to kill 3 of the children, 1 escaped. The woman gives them a photo of the surviving student. They take the photo to the school archives to identify the student. They discover the 4th child is the sheriff who told them to stay away from the killer's house. They are shocked to find the sheriff spying on them. He confronts them and accuses them of breaking into the school. He prepares to arrest them, but Connor uses the camera to take a picture of the sheriff. The ghost appears, grabs the photo, and tears it in half. This causes the sheriff to be physically split in half in front of them, killing him. The ghost continues to chase them. Bird and Casey run to the bathroom, turning on the hot water to prevent the ghost from touching them. This temporarily works. Bird leaves to search for Connor. She says she has an idea, but they need to have the camera with them and go to retrieve it from the ground. She makes the ghost chase her to the school's darkroom, where the ghost grabs her to kill her, but she takes a photo of it. Suddenly, she burns the photo and manages to kill it until it disappears in front of her. Afterwards, she goes back to check on Connor and Case to ensure they're okay, then throws the camera into the water to get rid of it forever. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an updates. See you in the next
Welcome to Cinema Bites, your go-to for movie recaps in a flash. Big twists, epic moments, all in just minutes. The movie begins in a terrifying forest with tall trees blocking most of the sunlight, except for a few rays that manage to break through. Suddenly, a dirty hand grabs a tree, and then we see a teenage ghost wearing a yellow hoodie running frantically. The person appears extremely exhausted, to the point of collapsing to the ground after running for a few minutes. He leans on his knees and hands, his fingers digging into the ground as he gasps for air. In the next scene, we see a red bus driving down an empty road surrounded by tall trees. Inside the bus, Nolan, a teenager wearing a gray hoodie and headphones, is looking out the window as the bus moves. We notice a teenage girl sitting in the seat next to him, sketching in a notebook. Nolan glances at her and smiles shyly, clearly showing he has a crush on her. The radio announces an upcoming lunar eclipse, and the driver lowers the volume before turning to the teenagers and asking if they plan to watch the eclipse. Carl, one of the teenagers, confidently says he saw something about it on YouTube, while Quinny, the girl next to him, says she'll watch it with her dad. The two start bickering for a moment before calming down. After a minute of silence, Reggie, a teenager with a nose piercing sitting alone at the back, crushes an empty can and throws it at Nolan, hitting him on the head. When Nolan turns around, Reggie teases him, and Nolan turns his attention back to Bess, the girl he likes, who smiles at him. The kids joke around for a minute, and after the laughter dies down, Joe asks Bess if she'll watch the lunar eclipse. When she hesitates to answer, Carl laughs and nudges Quinny, teasing Nolan and Bess. Quinny gets annoyed and abruptly moves to sit at the front, away from the two boys. The radio continues talking about the lunar eclipse, describing it as one of the longest and most spectacular eclipses. Reggie mocks Joe for driving slowly. The bus continues down the road, entering a darker path where the tall trees completely block out the sunlight. In the middle of the road, there's a fallen tree. Instead of turning back, Joe reverses the bus and takes a smaller, hidden path through the trees. The bus continues down this road, eventually emerging onto an open but deserted area with no trees or signs of life, and a thick fog blankets the surroundings. The kids look out the windows nervously, the fog obscuring their vision. As the bus moves slowly forward, they reach a narrow road with sparse trees and are forced to stop again because of a dead deer lying in the middle of the road. Joe gets out of the bus, warning the passengers to stay inside. He begins dragging the animal off the road. The group considers helping him, but decides against it. Joe drags the deer to the side of the road into the trees, pausing to wipe his hands before something makes him stop. The teenagers joke around in the bus as they wait for Joe to return. Carl starts telling a funny story to his friends, but is abruptly interrupted when Joe returns with a gun pointed at his head. The laughter stops instantly, and all the kids wear the same terrified, confused expressions as they see a strange-looking man following Joe. The man greets them menacingly, the gun still aimed at Joe, and orders everyone to sit down. Joe asks them to stay calm, assuring them the man won't hurt them. The gunman ignores Joe's words, shoving him and ordering him to sit and drive without saying another word. He gives the same command to the teenagers, who all sit quietly, except for Reggie, who stubbornly remains standing for a moment before returning to his seat at the back of the bus. The armed man directs Joe to the driver's seat and orders him to drive as the doors close. Carl suddenly remembers something as he looks at the madman in front of him, and the scene flashes back to a few days earlier when Carl was having lunch with his father, Chris. Carl was telling him a story about how he helped a girl defend herself from bullies at school. Chris didn't seem to fully believe the story but let Carl continue. The story was exciting but implausible, and Chris maintained a polite expression to show interest. When Carl tried to describe how he defeated the bullies, he accidentally spilled something on his dad's tablet. While Chris cleaned up the mess, a news story appeared on the screen, showing the face of a criminal. Carl asked his dad about it, and Chris explained that the man was a serial killer who had escaped from prison. He assured Carl they were doing everything they could to catch him because he was insane, ate tongues, and was obsessed with teenagers. Chris teased Carl, saying he could handle the escaped criminal just like he handled the bullies at school. Back in the present, Carl's eyes widen as he recognizes the armed man as the escaped criminal. The day turns to dusk, and the bus continues moving. Pedro the gunman orders everyone to throw their phones out the window so they can't call for help. They quickly comply, except for Reggie, who defiantly stares at him from the back seat. Joe pleads with Reggie to do as Pedro says, but the man silences him with a sinister laugh. Pedro walks determinedly toward Reggie at the back of the bus, pressing the gun to his head and assuring him it's real. After some insults, Reggie finally gives up and hands over his phone. Pedro snatches it, complaining that teenagers are like zombies, and orders everyone to sit back and enjoy the ride. The bus continues moving slowly as darkness falls. Outside, signs indicate they are entering an abandoned military zone. Nolan and Bess exchange glances with Carl, silently urging him to knock the gun out of Pedro's hand. But Carl is too scared and shakes his head. They look to Reggie, who sees the gun in Pedro's hand again. This time, Bess shakes her head no. At that exact moment, Pedro turns around and the two quickly adjust their posture. Pedro asks Nolan for his name, and the teenager hesitantly replies. Pedro comments that his name sounds like a comic book character's and shares that he used to love comics as a child, though not in a healthy way. He recounts how the first thing he ever stole was a pack of cigarettes and a comic book, revealing his obsessive nature. The bus remains quiet after that as they continue driving slowly until they reach a tunnel with bright lights and enter it. Suddenly, the engine fails, and the bus comes to a halt for no apparent reason. Joe curses loudly, and Pedro stands up, demanding to know what happened. Joe tries to explain as the gun is held to his head, and the gunman orders him to fix the engine. The terrified driver turns the key in the ignition several times, but the engine won't start. Pedro grows frustrated and grabs Quinny, who is sitting nearby. The girl struggles, and you beg him not to hurt her, but Pedro presses against her temple and turns to grab Queenie, who is sitting right behind him. The girl writhes and begs him not to harm her, but Pedro presses harder against her temple and orders Joe to fix the engine quickly if he wants to save her. Joe pleads with him to calm down, but Pedro screams at him to get off the bus and fix the engine. He warns Joe not to try anything funny and also warns the kids behind him before shoving Queenie off the bus after Joe. Joe goes to the side of the bus, starts it up, and Queenie follows behind him. He opens the compartment under the bus and begins to inspect it with a flashlight. The other kids watch from inside the bus, and Carl starts to panic. He tells his friends that Pedro is definitely going to kill them. Bess says they need to disarm the kidnapper to stop this. Terrified, Carl shakes his head in refusal, saying it's too dangerous to take the weapon from him now. Rhea agrees. Joe doesn't seem to know what the problem with the bus is and concludes it's an engine issue, something he can't fix. Suddenly, the lights go out, and the entire tunnel is plunged into darkness. The only visible light comes from inside the bus. Pedro points the gun at Joe, and everyone is terrified by the sudden power outage. As they look around, a strange sound is heard coming from the darkness ahead. Everyone freezes and listens intently. Joe shines the flashlight into the darkness but can't see anything. He leans forward, and Pedro exposes his back with the gun before telling him to check what's hidden ahead. Joe hesitates but offers to stay with the teenagers while Joe ventures into the darkness with only the flashlight for help. Joe cautiously moves deeper into the darkest part of the tunnel toward the sound. Pedro pushes Queenie back onto the bus, and everyone watches Joe through the glass. Joe continues into the darkness, and after a while, a low growl is heard. A massive figure wearing a hoodie rises. The kids behind him start to panic and scream. Joe's eyes widen in terror. He begins to tremble with fear before screaming as the monster grabs him by the chest. The passengers begin screaming and panicking even more. Pedro screams, trying to silence everyone as they rush toward the back of the bus. He orders them to sit down and be quiet, making it harder to manage the situation. He tries to think of a solution, reaches the driver's seat, and discovers the key isn't there. Furious, he curses before shoving Carl and pointing at the frightened teenager, ordering him to retrieve the key from Joe's corpse. Before Carl can respond, Nolan steps up and offers to go instead. Meanwhile, Bess runs to the front of the bus, and before anyone can stop her, she jumps out. Nolan tries to stop her, but Pedro points the gun at him, freezing him in place. Bess cautiously advances toward Joe, trembling. The others in the bus hold their breath. When she reaches Joe's remains, she kneels, shaking, to put her hand in his pocket to retrieve the key. She looks at his face and begins to cry but is distracted by a distant sound in the darkness. She grabs the flashlight and turns it on. A sudden movement startles her, and she runs back to the bus. Pedro takes the key from her and orders Reggie to start the engine. Nolan asks about Joe, and with a negative shake of her head, she says he's gone. Reggie tries to start the bus, but the engine won't turn over. Pedro begins to lose his patience and threatens to shoot the others if Reggie doesn't start the bus immediately. He threatens to start with Queenie, whom he mockingly calls Four Eyes. Reggie, upset by the insult, stands up and threatens Pedro, telling him to stop pointing at Queenie like that. In a moment of distraction, Nolan sees an opportunity. He quickly shoves Pedro, allowing Reggie to grab his gun. With the roles reversed, Pedro steps back momentarily and Reggie points the gun at him. But in an attempt to provoke him, Pedro starts insulting Reggie, saying he won't pull the trigger because he doesn't have the courage and is a coward. Something hits the bus, momentarily distracting the teenagers. This gives Pedro a chance to regain his gun. This time, he points it upward, and the teenagers start crying and trembling with fear. Pedro jumps off the bus and begins yelling for the monster to come out of the darkness. After a moment, his call is answered. As soon as he sees the monster, he freezes in disbelief and smiles nervously. A loud noise from outside startles the group. They gather in the aisle, listening to the loud gunshots outside. The girls scream loudly, and the boys curse. The panic escalates as Reggie makes things worse by turning on Carlo and shouting at him. Nolan tries to calm him down, but the argument continues until the girls intervene. The fight is interrupted by a strange growl right outside the window. As soon as they see the monster holding Pedro's corpse in its hand, they start screaming and huddle between the seats. The monster growls angrily, and the group notices its massive claws embedded in the man's head. After realizing they're in danger, they try to figure out how to survive. Reggie, upset, goes to sit in his usual seat at the back of the bus. The radio turns on, but they can't understand what the other person is saying. While trying to listen, Reggie suddenly feels dizzy at the back of the bus. He stands up, turns to the rear window, and presses his hands and face against it before collapsing back into his seat. In the next scene, the group hears the familiar growl signaling the monster's approach. They huddle together. Turning toward the sound, they start screaming as the bus begins to shake. We see the monster's long clawed fingers opening the door. Their screams intensify. They run toward the other door, and Reggie struggles to open it. Bess grabs the flashlight and shines it at the monster. This seems to have an effect on it, momentarily holding it back. Finally, the door opens, and they escape. Bess leads the way toward a door she had seen earlier in the tunnel. They find themselves in a shelter. After walking for a while, they find a room and decide to stay there after Nolan checks it thoroughly. On a wall beside them, Nolan and Bess find a drawing that appears to be a floor plan of a military fortress. They decide they need to find the control tower to turn on the lights, but Reggie doubts they'll find it. They start talking about Joe, and Reggie tells the others that Joe knew his father. Here, we learn that Reggie's father is in prison. Reggie adds sadly that his father is innocent and is serving time because he was wrongfully accused. Nolan takes the map off the wall and gathers his friends. He points to the control room, and Bess offers to go with him. Nolan is pleasantly surprised. Reggie wishes them good luck before the two set off to find the control tower. Along the way, they have a heartfelt conversation. Nolan takes the opportunity to compliment her drawings. He tells her about his mother, who used to paint, and how her favorite painting was of a blue sea by the ocean. Back in the safe room, Carlo makes drumming sounds and gestures as he counts everything he wants to say. Between the strikes, Reggie pauses, but he doesn't listen to him, and it's clear they're having a silly argument. Queenie interrupts the two and says she needs to go to the bathroom. The two choose Reggie to go with her, leaving Carl to continue making noise. We return to Nolan and Bess, who are searching for the control room. They find a massive machine that turns out to be a giant spotlight. Bess comments that the plan clearly didn't work. They aim the beam toward an inner cave where a corpse lies. Reggie and Queenie walk a bit, but before Queenie chooses a spot to relieve herself, she tells Reggie to turn around and move away. While she's busy, Reggie tells her she looks cute when she's angry and that he plans to make her angrier. He expects a response, but nothing happens. Reggie calls out to her assistant, unsure if he should turn around or not. Eventually, he decides to turn around and discovers she's gone. Panicking, he runs back to the safe room to call Carl. Meanwhile, Nolan and Bess continue exploring. Bess eventually calls her friend, letting her know they've found the control panel. Reggie and Carl keep running and calling for Queenie. Reggie blames himself repeatedly. Finally, they find her in a dark pit, screaming under a creature that appears to be eating her. Reggie bravely runs toward her and points the fire in his hand at the creature to scare it away. Carl manages to take Queenie to a safe place. Once they catch their breath, they remember Reggie and go back to look for him. Carl calls out to Reggie, who is now in trouble with the creature. Something drips from the creature's mouth onto Reggie's chin, appearing to be blood. Fortunately, before anything happens, Bess and Nolan finally manage to press the large button, lighting up the entire dark pit. Carl smiles in relief, knowing his friends activated the generator just in time. In the control room, Nolan and Bess find a small ladder leading downward. They enter a cave covered in newspapers and drawings of the creature that killed Joe. They discover books and notebooks revealing that someone was obsessed with the creature. Nolan finds a picture of his young daughter and begins piecing the story together. They rush back to tell their friends but suddenly stop in a dark pit. They see the shadow of someone approaching and wait fearfully to see who it is. Thankfully, it's Reggie. They both sigh in relief when they see Queenie injured. Carl starts rambling about what happened, but no one can understand him. Nolan calms him down, and Bess examines Queenie's wound. Queenie has a deep gash, and Reggie admits he was wrong to leave her alone. He tries to convince them to leave, but Bess explains they can't. The group heads to the control tower and finds the corpse of a man named Julius. Nolan leads his friends underground and tells them everything about the man. He explains how Julius became obsessed with the creature, which he called the Night Wanderer, after it abducted his sister. Nolan reads from Julius's notebook, and we see the story unfold. We flash back to Julius as a young boy wearing a yellow hoodie, walking in the forest with his sister. They love each other and go on adventures together. Nolan reads the story as we see Julius distracted, not noticing his sister walking toward the entrance of a tunnel. The girl sees something ahead, freezing in place. Julius notices, but it's too late. A scream echoes from inside the tunnel. Terror grips Julius as he takes a step back, his eyes fixed on the tunnel and what's inside. Another scream, this time from the creature, makes Julius look back and run. Exhausted, he collapses to his knees, crying. Later, we see Julius in a police car, clutching his sister's notebook. The scene shifts to Julius, at 50 years old, holding the notebook to his chest, unable to erase the incident from his mind. Determined, he enters the tunnel to find the creature that killed his sister. Surrounded by candles, he sketches out a machine he plans to use against the creature. In the next scene, we see him building his project, drawing inspiration from his sister's photo. In the present, the friends reflect on the story of the desperate man who risked his life to kill the creature. They theorize that the creature is parasitic and won't stop hunting Queenie until it finishes her. We see how Julius met his end in his underground room after his radio attracted the creature. The teens devise a plan to continue what Julius started. However, Queenie is upset, not wanting anyone to be harmed because of her. Her friends reassure her that no one will be left behind. They share a group hug before getting to work. They test old equipment, draw up plans, and work together to power up the spotlight. Finally, they create a plan to trap the Night Wanderer. They take Queenie to a safe place and put their plan into action. They lure the creature into the safe room using Queenie's bloodied clothes near the light source. She grabs the clothes as planned, and they suddenly turn on the light, injuring it. Reggie bravely confronts the creature, buying time for the girls to escape. Queenie and Bess manage to flee the tunnel, looking back to see the creature screaming at them but unable to leave the tunnel's darkness. The boys rush toward them with torches, trapping the creature. They corner the Night Wanderer and set it on fire, watching in satisfaction as it burns. In the next scene, Nolan narrates how courage was the lesson they learned from their ordeal, and how it will stay with them forever, even if no one takes it seriously. In the final scene, police officers investigate the tunnel. One officer enters the safe room with a flashlight, but a scream makes him stop and look around. He encounters something.
Hey film fans! Welcome to Cinepro, your ultimate hub for all movie recaps. From heartwarming classics to the latest blockbusters. The events begin with a young man named Yuck, who was out with his girlfriend Jenny enjoying the fresh air and the beautiful nature. But they were lost and didn't know how to get back to where they started their journey. By chance, they see an island in the distance and decide to head towards it. An hour later, they safely reach the island. Jenny says, "I'll go onto the island to see where we can sit." He replies, "I'll tie the boat to the shore and follow you." She walks through the forest, hoping to find someone living there. She reaches a place fenced off with wires and starts calling out loudly, but no one responds. She continues walking through the forest when suddenly she hears frightening sounds and feels like something is watching her. She looks around, scared and unsure of what kind of animal it is. Suddenly, a dog appears. She takes off running like crazy, terrified. She keeps walking until she hides behind a tree, staying silent. She thinks she's safe now, but suddenly, the dog grabs her by her leg and drags her all over the island. Yuck hears her screaming and says, "I'm coming for you, just tying the boat." The dog keeps attacking her until she dies. 3 days pass since this incident, and we see a plane heading to the same island. On board are 5 people planning to spend some quality time on the island. Among them are 2 brothers, Matt and John, along with Matt's girlfriend Nikki, a guy named Max, and his girlfriend Sarah. They're heading to their uncle's island, which he left them before he passed away. They haven't been to the island in 13 years and are very excited because they missed it. They safely reach the island, and their uncle's house is right in front of them on the shore so they don't have to walk far. They tie the plane with a rope to a wooden post so the waves don't carry it away. They enter the house, admire its appearance, and enjoy every moment there. Matt takes his brother John to their uncle's garage near the house, and they are surprised to find their uncle's car still there, just as it was. They assume it's broken since it hasn't been used in years. They refuel it, and John tries to start it, only to be surprised that it works just fine. Meanwhile, Sarah is in the house's kitchen preparing something for them to drink outdoors. Max and Eve are beside her, helping out. Suddenly, the electricity cuts out, so they head to the basement to check the meter and see where the issue is. Thankfully, they manage to restore the electricity. The next day, they head to the sea to swim and enjoy their time together. While sitting in front of the house, they are surprised by a small dog approaching them. Matt plays with it and says, "Maybe someone was on the island and this dog escaped from them." Since it seems like a friendly dog, they decide to let it stay with them in the house. Sarah grows very fond of the dog to the point that she wants to take it with her when they leave. Max goes into one of the rooms to grab something and finds the dog standing in front of him. The dog stares at him. Then he leaves the room. Sarah asks him, "What's wrong? Did you upset the dog?" He replies, "Nothing." Sarah and John go to comfort the dog and make amends. Sarah sees it standing at a distance and approaches to pet it. Suddenly, a female dog attacks her, seemingly the mother coming to defend her pup. Unfortunately, the dog bites Sarah's leg and leaves her injured. John carries her into the house after the attack. Matt tries to treat the wound but realizes it's serious because the dog's teeth deeply punctured her leg. He warns her that she might get an infection or rabies and needs treatment as soon as possible before anything happens. They decide to return home the next day to get Sarah treated. John, however, gets upset and wants to stay on the island. He says, "A dog bit me once and I didn't get treated or anything. Look at me now, I'm fine." Sarah asks Matt, "Is it a problem if I delay treatment?" Matt replies, "I don't think so, but the most important thing is to get treated within a week." So they agree to stay for 2 or 3 more days before leaving. At night, Matt talks to his girlfriend Nikki and tells her, "When I was a kid, I spent some time with my uncle here on the island. There used to be a special facility for training dogs on this island. I used to go there with my uncle to play with the dogs. But the problem was that rabies spread among the dogs, and most of them became aggressive. They had to kill all the dogs before they attacked and ate them. But I'm not sure if they killed all of them or if some escaped into the forest." Nikki asks, "So the dog that attacked Sarah might be one of them?" Matt replies, "It's possible that the dogs that escaped from the facility formed their own pack and took over the entire island." The next day, they have breakfast together in front of the house, laughing and joking around. But Sarah is focused on eating and behaves strangely, devouring her food aggressively. John grabs his bow and arrow and says, "I'm going for a walk in the forest. If I find any animals, I'll hunt them for fun. Anyone want to join me?" He takes Matt and Max, but Nikki decides to stay at the house with Sarah. Sarah doesn't seem to care about anything happening around her and keeps eating meat like a wild animal. After entering the forest, Max separates from them to explore and take pictures of the beautiful nature. He hears some rustling sounds around him and suddenly finds himself face to face with 2 dogs. So he pretends to be afraid and runs away from them. Out of shock, he falls on his face and he finds his friends. So he says to them, "There were dogs that wanted to kill me." Suddenly, the guy we saw at the beginning of the movie appears in front of them. He was drowning in his blood, and the dogs didn't leave a single part of him intact. He tells them, "You have to get out of here. The dogs don't like you being here." Suddenly, a dog attacks him, and the rest of the dogs gather around him. Some attack his arm, others his leg, and others his head. The group takes advantage of the distraction and runs toward the house. When they arrive, they find the girls coming out of the water with a group of dogs standing on the hill watching them. They call out to the girls and urge them to enter the house quickly. The dogs chase after them, trying to catch them before they can get inside. Everyone manages to get in except for Nikki, who is grabbed by her pants by a dog. John pulls out a bow and arrow and aims at the dog, but the dog dodges, and the arrow hits Nikki's leg. They carry her inside the house and lock themselves in. They give her alcohol to numb her body and ease the pain, then remove the arrow from her leg, causing her to scream in agony. Later, Sarah says, "The dogs don't want us here. We have to leave." They realize this is the same phrase that was told to them by Yak before he died. They also notice that Sarah is not acting like herself, behaving strangely. They decide to find a way to leave. While Max is talking, a dog attacks him through the window but doesn't kill him. The dog stares into Sarah's eyes without moving. Suddenly, it lunges at Sarah, but John grabs it by the neck, and Matt helps him until they kill it. They gather all their belongings and head to the plane to leave before anyone else dies. However, they are shocked to find 2 dogs standing in front of the plane. It becomes clear that the dogs are intelligent and understand that the plane is their only means of escape. The group waits for the dogs to leave before approaching the plane. After a while, Max looks out the window and is shocked to see that the plane has drifted away with the tide. They realize the dogs had chewed through the rope with their teeth to cut off their hope of escape. As soon as the dogs disappear, they rush to the plane, hoping to catch it before it drifts too far. Nikki discovers that the dogs indeed chewed through the rope. John gathers his courage, jumps into the water, and swims toward the plane to bring it closer to shore. But as he approaches, he finds the 2 dogs waiting for him. The dogs growl menacingly, warning him to turn back. He retreats, and the dogs chase him. Fortunately, he makes it back before the dogs catch him. When one of the dogs emerges, Max hits it with a club. They all retreat to the house and lock themselves in, watching helplessly as the plane drifts away with the tide. their only means of rescue gone. They board up the windows with wood for safety. Matt wonders how the dogs could be so intelligent, understanding that the plane was their escape route. Meanwhile, Sarah develops a fever. Matt reassures her, saying it might not be from the dog bite, but perhaps due to the changing climate or something else. Matt suggests to his brother that they head to the dog facility, hoping to find a communication device there. Since the facility is far from their location, they decide to use the car in the garage to reach it. However, going on foot would leave them vulnerable to the dogs. Luckily, there is a rope connecting the house to the garage. They decide to use the rope, but it's weak and might not support their weight. Nikki volunteers, saying she is light enough for the task. She successfully makes it to the garage through the rope, enters through the upper window, and tries not to make any noise to avoid alerting the dogs. However, the dogs are already aware of her presence and surround the garage. She reaches the car safely and locks herself inside, trying to start it but to no avail. The dogs attempt to break in. Racing against time, she opens the car's roof, climbs onto the garage roof, and escapes through the same window she entered from, locking it behind her for safety. She becomes trapped, unable to return to the house because the house's height is greater than the garage's. John comes up with a plan. He ties a rope to an arrow and shoots it toward her so they can pull her back using the rope. While tying the rope around herself, a dog attacks her, almost killing her, but they manage to pull her back at the last moment. They keep pulling until she safely returns to the house. At night, John talks to Sarah, telling her he feels she isn't herself and asks how she's feeling. She replies that she feels fine. Matt gets angry at his brother, blaming him for insisting they come to the island. John defends himself, saying he only wanted them to have a good time. Matt accuses him of being foolish and says they should have asked about the island before coming. John retorts, saying Matt is just like their father, always blaming others for mistakes. Nikki tries to calm John, saying his brother loves him and is probably just stressed. She reassures him that they will make it out safely. While they are talking, the electricity goes out. Max says he knows where the breaker is in the basement and goes to check it out, despite being scared of encountering a dog. He reaches the breaker safely and fixes the problem. However, as he returns, the power goes out again. In the darkness, he trips over a box and falls. When he gets up, he notices an opening in the basement leading outside. Suddenly, 3 dogs attack him, tearing into his flesh as he screams. The group hears his cries and rushes to the basement, but they find him dead. They close the door to prevent the dogs from entering and place a heavy desk behind it for extra security. The dogs try to enter through the windows. Sarah and Nikki attempt to block the doors and windows, but the dogs break into the house from all directions. The group is forced to retreat to the second floor and lock themselves in. One of the dogs attacks Matt, but John saves him. They all make it upstairs safely, locking themselves in and trying to calm down. They can think while Nikki treats the wound on Matt's back as they prepare to leave the island and seek treatment. Matt notices papers related to a dog training institution and realizes they were conducting experiments on the dogs, not training them. John asks his brother how their uncle got hold of those papers, suspecting their uncle might have been involved in the crime. Matt defends their uncle, saying he was responsible for animal cases and would never do such a thing. The next day, they confirm the dogs have left the house and quietly head to the garage to get the car. They safely reach the garage, but since the car's starter is broken, Matt pushes the car while his brother drives, hoping it will start. The car starts, but Matt falls to the ground and finds himself facing 3 dogs. He runs fast and manages to get into the car. They retrieve Alex and the arrow from his brother, but a dog jumps in front of John while he's driving, causing him to lose control. Alex drops the arrow, but Matt manages to enter the car and they are safe, thankfully. John tries to steer away from the dogs area, driving aimlessly, nearly falling off a cliff, but he stops the car just in time. They head back to the house. A dog jumps and grabs onto Matt, but Matt strangles it to prevent it from biting him. John crashes the dog into a pole. When they reach the house, Nikki comes out and tells them that Sarah refuses to come down. John goes up to convince her to leave. While talking to her, a dog enters. Sarah stares into the dog's eyes, and the dog stares back at her. She tells John to leave through the window while she handles the dog. John hesitates to leave her. He confronts the dog and throws it off the roof. He lands on his arm, writhing in pain. Sarah fights the dog until they both fall out of the window, and unfortunately, a wooden plank pierces both of them, killing them. They take the car and head to the institution. They find it locked with iron bars, so they climb over and explore the place themselves, trying to understand what exactly happened there. They confirm that experiments were indeed conducted on the dogs. They try to contact someone to rescue them, but discover a broken wire in the communication tower. John volunteers to fix it. While on the tower, he notices a yacht on the shore, which we understand belongs to Yuka and Jenny, seen earlier in the film. However, John gets electrocuted and falls to the ground. The electric shock causes a fire in the institution, with Nikki still inside. John and Matt are surrounded by dogs and fight them off with all their strength. Matt grabs a bat and keeps hitting them to protect his brother. Nikki sees the situation and devises a plan. She makes a loud noise to draw the dogs toward her, turns on a gas cylinder, and sets up a trap. When the dogs attack her in the building, she blows up the place, killing several of them. However, Matt loses control of his emotions because Nikki sacrificed herself for them. He tells John there's no hope for survival, as the dogs will kill them